Hello to everyone. I am Garrett Labonte, chairperson of LFC Boston, and I would like to welcome you to the fifth episode of the LFC Boston Speaker Series. Also, we'd like to welcome viewers who may not be members of LFC Boston. We're thrilled that you could join us for today's event. Today, Adam Zand, our social media manager, will be hosting Peter Moore, lifelong Brad, and former CEO of Liverpool FC. As part of these series, we will be making a charitable donation to the North Liverpool Food Bank, a cause near and dear to Peter. We'll be sharing the link in chat if you'd like to donate to a wonderful cause. With that, I am pleased to introduce Adam Zand, who will introduce Peter Moore.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy return to Champions League Day, and happy Mardi Gras to those who are celebrating. Welcome, as Garrett said, to the latest episode of our online LFC Boston Speaker Series. I'm Adam Zand, social media manager for LFC Boston. I'm joined today on the Zoom by Alice Finizzi, who's our treasurer, and she's also producing the show today. Thanks to Alice and all the committee members for their involvement in making this event happen. So we're really excited about today's guest, Peter Moore. I'll tell you a little bit about him that most of you will know. His career in the U.S. started as a rep for Patrick USA. I actually met Peter back in the 20th century during his 10 years with Reebok. He went on to a 20-plus year career in gaming, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Moore left EA and was announced as the new CEO of Liverpool in February of 2017. He took up that role, which comprised running the business of the club, on June 1st of 2017. And obviously, he reported directly to the club owners. Moore stepped down as CEO at the end of August 2020, and during his tenure with the club, LFC won the Champions League, FIFA Club World Cup, and the Premier League, number 19, as everybody knows.
Let's not forget the Super Cup, Adam.
It's so super, it's like. So Moore also was named the Premier League CEO of the Year in 2019. He created and funded the Peter Moore Foundation while he was in Liverpool, still operational, and we'll find out a little bit more about that. Thankfully, the foundation supports causes and institutions such as social isolation through the James's Place in Liverpool, food poverty, cancer research, as well as the Alder Hey Hospital and the relatively new Clatterbridge Cancer Center in Liverpool. For today's event, we'll learn a little bit more about a lifetime of support that started in the Garston area of Liverpool, his career path, thoughts on the state of the current team, and then his involvement with a couple of gaming efforts. And some people might know a Welsh team, partly owned by Wade Wilson, it says in my notes, AKA Deadpool. We'll feature some questions from committee members and you all on the telecast tonight. And if you wouldn't mind, please share one question in the Q&A, and we'll save lots of time for those. So I've talked long enough. Peter has generously offered an hour for today's session, so let's kick off. Peter, thanks for joining us. How did your love of football begin?
Wow. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And as many of you may know, I spent 10 wonderful years in New England, living just outside of Boston. So it's a great thrill to chat with fellow Bostonians. I was a decade there, but I still huge Patriots fan, huge Red Sox fan, not so much Celtics, kind of Bruins. But from the perspective of being able to share the afternoon with you guys, it's a great honor and privilege. Yeah, so I worked through the doors of Anfield at 4 years of age in 1959 with my dad. We beat Leyton Orient 4-3. We were still in the second division, and a mediocre second division team at that. That was in November of 1959. I was 4 and a bit. 30 days later, the board had enough of Phil Taylor, the current manager, and found a guy called Bill Shankly that they felt could get the club back into shape. And that is where really my love affair then started with the club. And went all the way through the boys' pen and ended up in the boardroom. And I know we're going to talk about the bits in between, but yeah, 1959 was the first time I saw Liverpool play live.
How about you? Did you play in school, and were you pretty decent?
Yeah, I was a little better than decent. I played, certainly in school, I played for my high school. I was good enough to play for Wrexham schoolboys. We'll talk about Wrexham later on. I played for North Wales. I played in the Welsh National League for about 8 years, Division 1. And in my days playing at a schoolboy level, a high-level schoolboy level, Joey Jones, who, if you're old enough to remember, was on the left side at left back, and I was the right back for Wrexham schoolboys. Played a number of times at the racecourse ground where Wrexham play. I've stayed in contact with Joey ever since and talked to him on a regular basis. And yeah, I was decent enough to come to America to play and to coach, and foolishly thought I could make a career in playing and coaching. That fell apart in about 9 months of arriving here, and then needed to get a real job and ended up working as a shoe salesman for Patrick Boots. So yeah, I was a decent right back, always played right fullback, always had number 2 on my back, and played just about all through Europe. We were on tour a lot, so thoroughly enjoyed probably 15 years playing at a decent level.
That's great. You mentioned Shankly and obviously your dad taking you to the matches. As a young supporter, did you have a favorite player on those teams?
Kevin Keegan. In the 70s, it would be Kevin Keegan, because that for me was the period where I was able to get to see them the most, and that period where we started to really dominate in Europe and those exciting European games. In the 60s, for me, it would be Ian St. John, Roger Hunt, Tommy Lawrence in goal, Ron Yates at centre back, Ian Callahan, who I got to know really well in my last few years at Liverpool, an absolute gentleman, and nobody will ever play more games for Liverpool than Ian Callahan. Callahan on one wing, Peter Thompson on the other. So yeah, depends what era, Adam, you're talking about. But if you say to me, the one player that encapsulated everything I thought about Liverpool and really embedded my deep love for the team was Kevin Keegan. So
good timing.
There you go.
Yeah, good timing. So that is my time period, you know, and I'm wondering, so I lived near Chester from 75 to 79. You know, those were just amazing years, but it felt like there was a progression, right? It didn't all come at once. There was the FA Cup in 74, and then obviously some moves into Europe and lots of success in the league. I'd love to hear like some standout memories you have from those years and run of silverware.
Yeah, I mean, the one moment I still remember when I say Kevin Keegan, who I've got to meet several times since, is that where I was a physical education teacher. I went to college and I grew up just outside of Chester, and my family still lives just outside of Chester. But I went to college in Staffordshire, and when we won the league at Wolves in 77, I was one of those vagabonds that invaded the pitch, and I shall never forget touching Kevin Keegan that night. If you've seen video of that, you know, thousands, the Wolves fans were completely outnumbered at Molineux, and with 2 minutes to go, every Liverpool fan was actually sat on the touchline. The police had lost control. It was all very good-natured, but I remember running and actually touching Kevin Keegan, a moment that I relayed to him rather creepily when I met him in the boardroom about, I don't know, whatever that was, 40 years later, which he enjoyed. But yeah, that and certainly that night when we won in 77 European Cup, Keegan tearing and ending Bertie Voigt's career, and Tommy Smith scoring from a corner with a header, never will happen before, never happened again. But that was a night that I shall never forget either. But yeah, those days in the 70s where I think we cemented the title of being European royalty and a team nobody wanted to play. I went to a couple of away games, but bluntly didn't have the money and time that I could take off college and ultimately being a teacher as well. But if you look back at those glory years, in particular Rome, and then, you know, the following year again, 78 and then 81. You know, just this is where, when you talk, as I did during my 3 years at the helm of the club, and you talk to thousands of fans about where did you fall in love with Liverpool, it was during that period.
So I had a lot of other questions, but we're just going to talk about those teams. You know, I'm just going to get rid of all the other questions. It's brilliant, and I like the full circle of meeting Kevin. I got one more show and tell for you.
There you go, Mighty Mouse.
So actually, that brings up a question. So Patrick USA, no connection with Keegan there, was there?
Absolutely, there was. Keegan Golds were the best football boots in the world. When I arrived here in America, actually, and where I am coming to you from right now in Santa Barbara as part of my sales territory, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think I would ever live here. But I was a commission-only sales rep for Patrick. Kevin Keegan and Michel Platini were the two players we had that the boots were named after. And I paid my rent and fed my family based on the back of Kevin Keegan, and a pair of Keegan Golds, pair of Michel Platini Golds, which are beautiful shoes, $120 in those days, kangaroo skin, gorgeous boots. At a time when Patrick, which if you're probably not our age, and I'm older than Adam, but you don't remember Patrick's, but they were a pretty dominant force in those days, and the two-stripe boot was something that I was able to leverage. My scouseness, my ability. I'd never sold anything in my life, but I needed to, and you know, my knowledge of football turned me into a football boot salesman here in Southern California. And Keegan was always, it seemed to be following my career all the way through. So it was a very important part of that, and great boots. If you've never worn a pair of Patrick's, you've never worn a pair of football boots.
Yeah, I had them, but they didn't work for me for some reason. Yeah, that's a whole nother story. So I want to talk about some other games. You know, a lot of us know of your past involvement with EA and Dreamcast. So first of all, what attracted you to the business of gaming? How did that happen?
Well, you know, I had, you know, 11 years of Patrick, just to fill in the gaps. I went from commission-only sales rep to sales manager, moved up to the Bay Area, and which is kind of my American home. Spent most of my 38 years prior to going to Liverpool in the Bay Area. And from then on in, I got recruited. I became president of Patrick USA, an 11-year career of Patrick. Got recruited by Reebok to move to Boston. Bought a house with the family in Medfield, and we were in Stoughton, horrific place. Not Stoughton, but the facility Reebok was in. This preceded them going to Canton for the building out of the campus. It was, you know, flat in the middle of the sneaker wars between Reebok and Nike. And if you're, again, of a certain age, these were two brands that were head to head. It seems ridiculous now, given where Nike is and the sad state, unfortunately, of Reebok, a brand I still love and invested 9 years of my life in there. But, you know, it was very clear towards the end of the 90s that we were just losing this battle, and Nike was on this absolute tear of authenticity. And, you know, we had tried to get into cleated product. The consumer wasn't accepting Reebok. You know, we were in the NFL. My job was to get us into soccer. At first, I became eventually senior vice president of global sports marketing, but I built the soccer business. So the Ryan Giggses of this world, the Dennis Bergkamps of this world all wore Reeboks. And we were on a pretty good tear. This is before Nike even got into the soccer business. But it was unsustainable for Reebok. They just couldn't keep up with the steamroller at that time that was Nike. So as often is the case for many of us in our careers, I got a phone call one day from an executive recruiter and said, "What do you know about video games?" And not much. I always remember telling him the only thing I know is that I bought my son Tyler a Sega Saturn, and then for about $500, and then 12 months later, they're not making games for it anymore. And he said, "Well, it's interesting you say that, because Sega are interested in talking to you about being senior vice president of marketing back in San Francisco. they have a console called the Dreamcast to launch. There's no head of marketing. In those days, it was still very much boys in their bedrooms. It was teenage boys that were playing games, not certainly the proliferation and the ubiquity of gaming that we all enjoy today. And so the idea was, if you could market sneakers, you could market video games. Eventually I figured that out, but it took me a little while to get my head around it. And bizarrely, within 90 days of me arriving back in San Francisco as head of marketing for Sega, I became president. My boss was asked to leave by our Japanese overlords, and I was installed as president with the job of launching the Dreamcast. And for those of you not in gaming, the Dreamcast was significant because it was the first online console. It was the first non-computer that you could actually go online and interact with, and albeit in dial-up, 56K baud modem, and was great until your mom picked up the phone in the other room and completely cut you off from your game of NBA 2K or NFL 2K. And I had a wonderful 5 years there, learned so much about the industry and about technology, you know, really was at 45 years of age, a complete career change for me. Jumping into something which became a theme of something I'd never done before at an age when I should have done it a lot earlier. But I was so fortuitous to land in gaming then, which was, again, very much teenage boys and what is now a $160 billion industry. And, you know, was able to enjoy 20 years of that, learning each and every day with the companies that I was working for.
It's brilliant. I'd kind of like to transition to LFC, obviously, because that's what a lot of people want to hear about. But the gaming stuff fascinates me too. And Dreamcast was like a seminal moment in gaming for a lot of people. That was like the ultimate platform, and still people look back at it longingly. And obviously, you did stuff with the Xbox, which even furthered the science of online and connectedness around the world. So I want to kind of combine the two. Yeah. Like, are there lessons that you learned from the gaming industry that you brought to Liverpool with you?
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the gaming industry, which is, you know, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people that use your product almost on a daily basis and love your product, fanboyism, Xbox versus PlayStation apart, you need to engage those people, and even more so in the world of gaming, because as everything has evolved in free to play and a different business model, then the engagement ultimately means monetization. So we started, you know, when I first joined gaming, we needed to sell as many copies of the game as we could. We would sell you a copy, and then we would come back a year later or 2 years later and try and sell you another copy. We started to see, certainly at Microsoft when I was there, this movement towards games more of a service, and then building service levels around like Xbox Live. And so all of that, when I got to Liverpool, I was surprised, somewhat unpleasantly surprised, how we were approaching our engagement with fans around the world, such as the people that we're talking to here today. And I was one of you. I was living in San Francisco and yearning for more content, more engagement. You know, I'll spend more money. How do I get a shirt? Can I subscribe to exclusive videos, et cetera, et cetera? So we embarked upon, and to be fair, it was already underway, but embarked upon a journey at Liverpool called Fan Connect, which was a major investment, greenlit by our Boston ownership group, FSG, to engage with our fans all around the world, our fans who live right by Anfield and our fans who lived in Bangkok or Barcelona or Boston. Ultimately, because the same thing applied. It's acquire, engage, monetize. The only difference is I would never say monetize in the world of football, because that would just get me hung from the nearest street corner in Liverpool. From that perspective, we started to build, and hopefully you've noticed, more content, more engaging content, inside Anfield, training ground, better mobile interactions, better e-commerce, building out the ability, market basket stuff, all of the things that you may or may not notice, but that was part of what we did. And then bringing people in that could look at our social media platforms, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, obviously, Facebook, and then in the 3 years just exploded. Now, a lot of that's to do when you're winning, and when you're winning the way you're winning, and when you have the most charismatic manager in the world, and you are ultimately champions of everything and everywhere. Of course, engagement is going to increase. But having said that, you still need to build the technological platforms that allow you to engage back into. And the way you will see it as fans is when the club pushes out its commercial results once a year. You will see the commercial element of it start to rise. Football, I learned, is relatively simple, and I say this rather facetiously. It's a virtuous cycle. You make money, you invest in better players win you games, better sponsors come along and want to be a part of you, and they write bigger checks. You make more money, you buy even better players. And so everything is invested on the pitch. Better players, better results, better sponsors, more money. Better players, better results, better sponsors, more money. A classic in business virtuous cycle. And that's what we had and have at Liverpool.
I just want to step back because you talk so much about the 70s. Like, was that sort of assumed that was always going to stay that way? Or talk to me about that transition from, those glory years to, a bit of a rut that we got into.
Well, the 70s were great. The 80s were okay. The 90s and 2000s, not so much. But here's the thing you learn as well. When you've got, and I hate to call the club a brand, but when you've got a presence in the hearts and minds and souls of tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, you're almost immune to poor results, poor runs. Because if you're a fan that only wants to support a winning team, Liverpool is not for you, because everything we've been through, all of the triumphs, but the tragedies, everything that makes this incredible football club more than just winning tonight in, Budapest against Leipzig. Because for every tonight there was last weekend, right? And so you've got to, as Shankly famous said, if you can't support us when we lose, don't bother supporting us when we win. And I've lived through 60 years of this. And remember, when I first started watching, we were a mediocre second division team. So I think the ability to build, again, I don't use the word brand publicly, but to build this platform that is immune to the ups and downs. We love Liverpool for so many reasons, and taking full advantage of that. And I've always said, we stand on the shoulders of giants as a football club, whether it's Shankly, Paisley, Dalglish, you Benitez, you go through the managers, Joe Fagan, and obviously Jurgen now. You've got the benefit of, arguably the most charismatic manager in the world. The players, you go from the St. John's and the Roger Hunts, who are still around the club to this day, to that period of the 70s with Toshak, Keegan, into the 80s, with Kenny, with Rushy, and then all the way through, hundreds of players. And one of the things that I did at Liverpool, when I got there, I was stunned to find there was no formal former players association. So I built an organization called Forever Reds, and we reached out to every single player that had ever kicked a ball in anger for Liverpool Football Club, of which there were over 300. And we built this organization now called Forever Reds with John Aldridge as the chairman, and Ian Callahan and Phil Neal, David Johnson, great players from our past who are very active with a focus on philanthropy. And again, giving back to the community that needs it so much. So yeah, you build your brand on the shoulders of You'll Never Walk Alone, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Bill Shankly, the tragedies of Heysel and Hillsborough, the league championships, the droughts. It's almost, like the Red Sox. The Red Sox wouldn't be the Red Sox if there wasn't 86 years of futility, right? And so the curse of the Bambino and all of that, and as Red Sox fans, we're all used to the ridiculous Bill Buckner and everything that we're used to. Well, that all goes to make what the club is. And, that's why we're not Spurs or Arsenal or Chelsea. There's real grit, there's real drama and tragedy and sadness and euphoria and authenticity and everything that makes the people of Liverpool smile for 90 minutes every weekend.
It's great. Perfect sense and perfect description. So, I want to get into that. You take your dream job in many ways, but you didn't start at the start of the FSG. 10 years. You came in more recently. So, what was it about the timing, and how did you see the role of CEO functioning?
So, and I think I've talked public about this. I actually got tapped on the shoulder a long time ago by what was then New England Sports Ventures, and would you be interested in doing? And the timing wasn't right for me then. I had just started at EA, and I'm very glad, bluntly, that I stayed at EA. Otherwise, I wouldn't be living in this house here in Santa Barbara. From the perspective of doing things in your career that feel like the right time with the right platform to make a difference, and the right experience that you've got to come in and make a difference. And when Ian Ayre, my predecessor, had announced to the club that he was basically giving them 12 months notice, that's when the second time around the executive recruiters had come and said, look, you should talk to John Henry, you should talk to Tom Werner, and then a little later on, Mike Gordon, about coming in. You're kind of a unicorn. You understand Boston, you're a dual citizen. I'm American and British. Liverpool upside down. You're a Red Sox fan. I mean, it just went on and on and on. And you bring experience in running large organizations with fervent amounts of fans, followers, i.e. gamers. And we think that, you'd be a great candidate for the role. And ultimately, after several months of going back and a lot of conversations about the downside of being a fan, and whether, ultimately, being a fan, as Ian was before me, was a plus or a minus. Fortunately, we decided in the end it was a plus. But from the perspective of, being lured into that, and everything that I went through to leave America, for my wife and I to leave our kids as we did. Now they're all adults and doing great. And so it wasn't like we're walking away from 4-year-olds. But from the perspective of ripping up our life, me leaving EA, which I absolutely loved working there, to go do what I thought was giving back to my football club, giving back to a football club that had given me so much joy over the previous, at that time, 56, 57, 58 years, and somehow adding some value. We did a 3-year deal, which is what we lived up to. Turned out with COVID to be 3.5 years. I could never have dreamt how successful we were going to be on the pitch. But equally importantly, the progress we made off the pitch, and then my little personal stamp of how not only I, but my wife, who's still very engaged with Red Neighbors and the foundation as a volunteer, even from here, we're able to give back to the city. And that's one of the things that I really learned about being the CEO of a football club. Yeah, the football's great, but the reliance on people's emotional well-being and the things that you can do, and in the case of Liverpool, the economic impact that Liverpool Football Club has on the city of Liverpool, which I commissioned Deloitte to figure out, put a number on it. It was close to £500 million a year.
Wow.
All of that comes together. And, to your question, you have a deeper sense of what it means to be the CEO, not just of a football club, but the uniqueness of being the CEO of Liverpool Football Club.
So I'll jump in with a question from Mark Davis, one of our members. When you got that call to become the CEO that second time, how long did it take you to make the decision?
It took about 4 months. It took
really?
Yes. Without getting into, the amount of money that I left on the table at EA, because that's, oh well. Ripping yourself out of one country and then thinking I'm British, but having not lived there since 1980 and realized that I'm really not. And, walking away from a career, a job, everything that entailed doing that was not easy. This was the only job that I would ever move back. Look, I love Liverpool, I love England, but I love it like for 4 nights at a time, maybe 5 days, and then jump back on a plane at Heathrow type thing and come back to the California sunshine. And I loved it. And my son and I in particular would go over and watch games and really enjoy a few days there. My family, my brothers and sisters live outside of Chester. And so it's great to see them. But I never, ever dreamt that I would ever move back to the United Kingdom. So doing this was not inconsequential as regards selling up, giving, pretty much giving everything away here in California, moving, buying a home outside of Liverpool, and then reestablishing your life again for, albeit 3.5 years, but more to give back. This was not a career move for me. This was a move that, in the end, when I had to make the decision, my dad, who's been gone 20 years, would have said to me, absolutely, go do it. My dad has, as I've said many times, has "you'll never walk alone" etched on his headstone. And so you think about all those things when you're making these hard decisions of life. And there's not much harder than selling up and leaving and go to live in a different country and having to reestablish yourself. And my wife, who's a California girl, never left America, never mind lived in deepest Liverpool, and for the first 6 weeks couldn't understand a word anybody was saying, and wondered why everybody was asking her, "Are you all right?" And she kept looking in the mirror to see if she was okay. And so, and now she can talk Scouse with the best of them because she does chair yoga back to senior citizens back in Liverpool, and has done for many years now as part of social isolation support. So yeah, it was not easy, Adam, bluntly just saying, sure, I will, of course I will. There was a lot of unraveling to do to make it happen.
That's great. So another question from a friend of LFC Boston. So Rob Glover jumps in.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so he says, do you remember that moment when you realized you were back in the city? And I'm going to add to his question, the city changed so much from when we were, fans. Like, it became a cosmopolitan, it became a destination. Did that sort of help in the decision making, that the city was just so vibrant and up and coming?
It did. The Liverpool that I grew up in the late 50s and the 60s was a tough place. It's one of those where we're radical Scousers. It's the People's Republic of Liverpool. We're Scouse, not English. All of the things that we throw up to protect ourselves at times from the tough times, and we've created this persona of who we are. The only people that believed in us ultimately was the European Union, as bizarre as it was. And
it's true.
The European capital of culture of this unbelievably rich historical city that, again, look, you don't have to look under many rocks to find slavery and the cotton industry going out the Manchester Ship Canal. And, at one point, this was the hub of European trade. And today you walk along the docks and, what an incredible 45-minute walk from Waterloo Dock down to Toxteth and back. And if you're switched on and understand, most of the world's trade at one point was on that 2-mile stretch. And the only time it wasn't on that 2-mile stretch is when German bombers were coming over trying to destroy it. And so you think of those terms, and I lived in an apartment at the West Tower right on facing Prince's Dock. And so my wife and I would walk during that first summer in 2017 to the Maritime Museum, the museum, the Liverpool Museum, all the way down to the Albert Dock, and just incredible. My dad was a docker. And so, I'm retracing the footsteps of so many Liverpudlians and looking back over to Birkenhead and to Seaforth and to the fair, the other side where I eventually lived on the Wirral. What an incredible city it is with incredible people. And if I hadn't have gone there and lived it, I would have still had this view of the 60s, which is when I left. I would go and go over there and stay with my family between Wrexham and Chester, and then go to the game. But I wouldn't spend much time in Liverpool. And having this opportunity and walking around the city as we started to do in the Baltic Triangle and the Georgian Quarter, just the incredible history, the architecture. As I always say to everybody, look up when you're walking around, because the architecture in the city is stunning. and the history of the city itself. So this is why I commissioned the Deloitte economic impact report and said, what impact do we have on the city of Liverpool as a football club? And not only we do that, but what do people think of it? And it was very clear, the research, they came for the football and came back for the city. That was the answer we got every single time. You know, because I became a little bit of an advocate of try to break the stereotype of Scousers, because the jokes of, you know, look after your car for sixpence, mister, and which, yes, we all ran those protection rackets when we were kids. But from the perspective of, you know, this joke of scallywags and Scousers can't be trusted. And I would do speeches whilst I was there of breaking down these stereotypes. The Scousers are the warmest people you'll ever find. And a lot of it comes through just austerity and poverty and having to, you know, bootstrap yourself up. And so you become the classic Scouser. And we've, over generations after generations after generations, Liverpool has got this unique personality that no other city in England comes close to.
I'm wondering, I want to ask you about that community relations aspect of your job, but first, did Deloitte look at the other major team in the Merseyside, Tranmere Rovers?
They actually, they couldn't figure out whether Tranmere actually made 50p or a pound net. I'm kidding. Tranmere does all right, by the way.
They're going to Wembley. They're going back to Wembley again.
Tranmere go to Wembley more than we go to Wembley. I just think that. Mark Palios and Nicky Palios pinged me today. They're going back to Wembley again. God bless them. And Liverpool women, you know, I love Tranmere. And when I first got there, we'll talk about the women's team, I'm sure, but I dragged the women's team out of Widnes Rugby League Stadium and put them into Prenton Park. You know, let's at least think we're on Merseyside and play on natural grass instead of playing on a rugby league 3G pitch. That felt to me, you know, the first night I went to Widnes on a cold September night, I remember it. I said, this doesn't even feel like I'm on Merseyside anymore. So no disrespect to people from Widnes, but it wasn't the place where Liverpool should be playing. So yeah, God bless Tranmere. Yeah, everybody they did not take into account any other teams.
Good. That's the only team I care about. Besides Liverpool. So I you know, we're moving along in time, and I don't want to run out for the end for questions, but you know, just briefly, can you talk about your role with the LFC Foundation and how important that was to you?
Very important. One of the things that was very clear to me, despite everything we say about the city being revitalized, there was still incredible poverty. As we did, I immersed myself straight away. I was vice chairman of the LFC Foundation. Concurrently, we just built the Red Neighbors group, which focused on taking care of people in the L4, L5, L6 postcodes, which surround the stadium. And straight away, it was very clear to me that not a lot had changed since I was a little boy. Growing up, I was born in Sefton General Hospital on Smithdown Road, but grew up on Scotty Road, Scotland Road. And, you know, we've all driven up Scotland Road to Everton Valley to get to Anfield. And so from that respect, you don't have to turn too many corners to find the same levels of poverty. And so not only do we have the LFC Foundation, but we built a group called Red Neighbors who take care of the very specific challenges that the people who live in and around the stadium and got very involved there. And then I realized, you know, you do this just soul searching. As I said, I've been lucky in life and I've done well in life. And so a lot of it I attribute to being a Scouser. You know, my personality, you know, gift of the gab, everything that Liverpudlians have, I've been able to use that as, you know, tools by which to build my career. And I've done well in life. And it was very clear to me that, you know, I could help these people. I don't need to work anymore, but I do because what else am I going to do? But I also had, you know, bluntly more money than I needed. And why keep it when there are people that could desperately use it because they can't put food on the table or they live alone? You know, this was exacerbated obviously during the pandemic. So within the first few months, I formed my own foundation. I funded it myself from basically sold some of my portfolio here in the United States, brought the money over, and started to be very strategic in investing in rather than just here's a check. I had worked very closely with Bill Gates at Microsoft and watched in awe what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did. And Bill, who I love, wasn't just, I'm going to write you $1 billion check. No, I'm going to write you a 25-page thesis about what you're going to do with this money. And if you deviate from this, I'm pulling the money away because I want accountability with my money. Now, I'm not doing that, but so I formed the Peter Moore Foundation and funded it, and then started to go about where can I put £5,000 here and £10,000 there and £25,000 there for it to be best used. You mentioned, Adam, at the outset, Alder Hey Hospital. My mum was a nurse at Alder Hey Hospital. And if the folks on the call don't know, Alder Hey Hospital is a jewel of a hospital that takes care of children. 275,000 children a year go through Alder Hey, suffering from cancer, suffering from birth defects, and those wonderful, wonderful people that are Alder Hey fix them. And my mum, I had a great photograph of my mum when she was 18, and she was in a nurse's uniform. And I funded the building of a burns unit and an EKG unit for young children, put my mum's photograph there, the Marilyn Moore room, and was able to give back in her memory. Same with my dad, Anfield Sports and Community Center, which many of you will never know exists, but right at the back of Anfield, which takes care of the recreational needs of those people around there in the L4, L5, L6 area, and built a classroom with technology, with video screens and what have you, and put my dad's photograph. So that's the Terry Moore room there. And we can go on. Clatterbridge Cancer Hospital you talked about. Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, which does programs for kids and uses music as a way to motivate kids out of poverty. And then probably the most prevalent thing is the first home game I went to, there was this little green van rolled up collecting food. And this van could have been 50 years old for all I knew, could barely make it to the back of the fan zone behind the Anfield Road end. And I started chatting with the two guys, Ian Byrne and Dave Kelly, a red and a blue, about what this is all about. And he said, we collect food for those who can't put food on the table, and we use football as a platform. It's called Fans Supporting Food Banks. And I said, that's great, but that van's not going to make it. Where do you go with the van? He said, well, half the time we're pushing it back to North Liverpool. So I said, look, I'm going to buy you a van, and we're going to design a van, and we're going to make sure that we're using the distribution power of this van, and it's going to increase your ability to collect more food and deliver more food. So we spec'd a van, we bought a van. It's the van you see at Anfield. It's purple, which is red and blue together, obviously. And I am the honorary president of Fans Supporting Food Banks. And that van gives me great pride. And subsequent to that, I've continued to contribute financially to the food bank. And the same with the foundation. You may have seen that, I felt horrific when LFC Foundation Day only raised £10,000. And between everyone, it's usually £1 million because we have the Legends game, and so I go, whoa. So I don't know, over the weekend, I'll double it. But, I know what it takes to run these programs, and £10,000 isn't going to get it done. So did my little bit. But food banks. And then the other thing I take massive pride in is my wife, Debbie, is a yoga instructor, and social isolation is such a fundamental issue in Liverpool. And by that, we mean primarily women who've lost their husbands and their family. They live on their own. They're 70, they're 80 years of age. They have raised children, they've raised grandchildren. Now people have left and they're on their own. And she does chair yoga. She started doing it at Anfield in the fall of 2017 in box 1A, which is a box we use where the Kenny Dalglish and the cop meet. And since we moved to California twice a week, 2 hours every morning here, I hear Scouse accents floating through the house here. We're all the chair yogis who use it as much to talk to each other and exchange stories, as well as to do some actual yoga as well gets done. But it's about, as my wife learned the word natter, it's about having a natter. It's about talking to each other. So a great deal of my work at Liverpool, when I look back, I forget what went on the pitch, because that was Jurgen and everybody, and I was so honored to be along for that ride. But the lasting legacy for me is seeing smiles on people's faces, or being able to put food on tables, or to support wonderful enterprises and entities like Alder Hey Hospital and Clatterbridge Cancer Hospital. Our cancer rate in Liverpool is terrific. It's a lifestyle issue, but 50% of the residents of Greater Merseyside will have some form of cancer in their lives, which is unbelievable to me. And those of us live here in America, particularly in developed cities like Boston and where I am in Santa Barbara, our rates are half of that. And a lot of it's lifestyle related. So to be able to actually contribute to that, to help, not to help in any way treat, which is actually what we do, but to educate people. It's a multi-generational offshoot of poverty. You eat poorly, you don't exercise, you drink heavily, you smoke, all of the things that tie into poverty. And so what we're trying to do with Clatterbridge Cancer is do educational programs. It won't impact people in our lifetime, but the next generation, hopefully it will.
That's brilliant. I want to throw in one addition. You've passed on philanthropy and a care for the community to your daughter, and she's doing great things, particularly with men who are dealing with social isolation and depression through James's Place. So I just, I've read a little bit about that, and obviously LFC Foundation has thrown their support behind that as well. So I'm glad you're passing this all on to the next generation.
Absolutely.
I want to, we can jump to the team. I know you've got to be buzzing about today, right? Like that was
as we talked before we got going here, it's one of those games you sit here, you think, boy, this could be the season here, because I know what it means financially to the club to progress in the Champions League. We're going to be, there's no doubt, in for a bit of a dogfight to be in the top four. I think we'll make it, because we're too good a team not to. But the Champions League, as I discovered very quickly whilst I was at Liverpool, is a very lucrative competition. It serves two purposes as you progress. So today, there'll be a winner's bonus today, which is considerable. Unless something disastrous happens in the next leg, we'll progress. You're talking, 6, 7, 8, 9 million pounds for every leg that you progress through. You get to the next stage, the final 8. And there's more money to be made there. It's important to, and exacerbated by the global pandemic. There's no match day income. There is no match day income. We had to pay back money to the broadcasters. And so, and the club continues to pay the people, even when they're not working. So from that perspective, there's huge holes in the P&L. And so that would be not to make Champions League next year disaster. And in particular, luring players who want to play for Liverpool, want to play in the Champions League. Look, here comes Thiago, who could play just about anywhere, but is lured by playing for Liverpool, playing for Jurgen Klopp, playing in the Champions League, reinvigorating his career, playing in England. And so we need to continue to have that lure that clubs who don't typically play in the Champions League don't have. And so today was, yes, I thought it was a great performance. It was the classic Liverpool away in Europe performance. Dominate possession against a very good Bundesliga team, let's be fair. Take your opportunities when they come. 2 bad defensive mistakes, which we pounced on, and thank God it was Mo and Sadio on the end of them. And then, whilst we had some, near misses, I didn't feel like we were really threatened, throughout the game. And to get 2 away goals and then to defend 2 away goals at Anfield feels like we're, I don't want to ever get ahead of ourselves, but feels like we're in good shape to get to the next round.
That's great. And we're looking forward to they wear blue, I think, on the weekend. We're playing another team. So it's a nice lead into that. So, we're moving along in time. I want to get some like short reactions to some of the joys of your time, being in the executive suite. Just a short story or a feeling you had. Barcelona second leg.
Barcelona's second leg needs to be prefaced with Barcelona first leg, and then the lead up to Barcelona's second leg. We flew to Barcelona. So, I'll fly with the team. Most of the time, it's great getting back on the plane after a game. Other times I don't make eye contact with Jurgen on the bad nights. And I've had some, flying back from Red Star Belgrade nights and that kind of stuff where you go. Napoli nights, you get on a plane at 1 a.m., you go lose at Napoli, which we seem to always do. And, it's not a good mood. The good news is they get to Melwood the next day and they sort it out. We went to Barcelona, and so this is where it's very privileged. I'm sat next to Josep Maria Bartomeu, the president of Barcelona. What happens with Champions League is you go in the day before, depends on the timing, but typically go in the day before. If you have the opportunity to visit the city, which we generally don't because you have protocol. So when you go in, so Barcelona, great example, they will take you to a magnificent restaurant, buy you lunch, the UEFA delegate, you'll make a speech, I'll make my speech about Liverpool, they make their speech about Barcelona. We then go to the game the following day. The days of the game are always long days because, it's 9 o'clock kickoff. In some instances, Moscow was a 10 o'clock kickoff when we played Spartak. And sat next to Bartomeu in Camp Nou, obviously, and it's like, and somehow we lost 3-0. I have no idea. And Bartomeu kept saying to me, he said, I don't know how we're winning. And to his credit, said, and then when Messi scores that incredible free kick, he goes, I'm sorry. He said, we don't deserve this because you're killing us here. Fast forward to the return leg at Liverpool, I take what I typically have done over the years is we have a great restaurant in Liverpool called the Art School, which many people visit. It's a superb restaurant. It will be the restaurant that gets the first Michelin star. Paul Askew is the chef, big, massive red. And Bartomeu, and look, we're losing 3-0, right? They just need to score 1 goal and we have to score 5. And so he says, I'm really worried. I'm talking to him and I'm sat with it. And he's a great guy. And I said, you're messing with me. And he said, yeah, I'm really worried. And I said, you're winning 3-0. You are Barcelona. And, you're the team right now of obviously Messi, Suarez, Coutinho. You just need to score 1 goal. And then we need to score 5. He said, no, I'm worried. And I thought he was joking. I thought it was the classic wind up. And then in the boardroom at the beginning, one thing that I did in my role in the boardroom is make a speech. Bizarrely, no other Premier League CEO does that. And it's just, and I felt this is the way you're coming to Liverpool. I'm getting on the microphone and I'm welcoming, and welcome to Kenny Dalglish, welcome to Ian Rush, welcome to typically Gareth Southgate and all of the celebrities that we would have over the years, Elvis Costello, Daniel Lewis, blah, blah, blah. And created this environment in the boardroom that felt very convivial and collegial. And welcomed the Barcelona executives. What I do, I said, please come forward. I'm going to get on the microphone and I welcome you on behalf of Liverpool Football Club. And we're looking forward to great. I remember saying, and he's messing with me because he thinks that they're the underdogs. They're the underdogs. They're Barcelona. They're 3-0 up on the underdogs. Well, that night was incredible. And I don't need to go over that night with anybody. But one thing I will say is where I sat in my front row on the aisle seat, the opposing chairman or chief executive was sit maybe no more than 4 feet away from me. And then you could imagine how crushed they were at the final whistle. And Bartomeu, to his credit, came across, hugged me, said, now go on and win him. And so, from that element of it, and he stayed a really good friend of mine. So I can't say that about the class and elegance of some other executives at other clubs. who wouldn't shake hands with you. There is a protocol you have in the director's box that just before the kickoff, and you'll never walk alone, which everybody loves, the visiting directors love, you would lean across and shake hands. And then at the final whistle, no matter what had happened, you'd shake hands. And then you'd go back up the steps to the boardroom and you'd have a glass of wine or whatever before we all went home. There are some executives who shall remain nameless that couldn't take defeat at Anfield and didn't want to be on the end of a handshake. Bartomeu was wonderful. And so, yeah, you think of those moments, you'll never, ever, ever forget those moments. And I had to go home. I had to calm down the adrenaline that night. And then I had to sit and watch the entire game over again, just to make sure I understood what had happened. And it was probably 2 a.m. before I went to sleep.
I still watch it, and I still watch You'll Never Walk Alone just every month or so. You just put that on. That was amazing. So let's obviously Liverpool, a 30-year wait, just an amazing performance that I think almost gets underplayed because we were going through a pandemic for a lot of it. But just an amazing team. And you got to give me a shorter answer this time because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Give me Salah's goal against United, and the supporters finally get to sing, "Now you're going to believe us."
Yeah, no, that was the moment. I was earlier than that. So for me, when I knew we were going to win the league, we came back from Qatar. We were tired. If you recall, we were going to Leicester City, and it was Boxing Day night, and Leicester was on our heels, and everybody thought Liverpool was up for the taking because, we'd been away. It was actually good preparation, as you then saw. But the euphoria of winning, the Club World Cup or what have you, and then Leicester was on fire. So we go to the King Power, and it's Boxing Day, so it was just myself, Debbie, my wife, and Danny Stanway, the club secretary, just the three of us, because everybody else, it's Boxing Day. Nobody wanted to go to a game. And I'll never forget, the lights come down to King Power, the Fox Hunter is on his trumpet, and that crowd is just wound up because they think they're going to take us. And if you remember that game, we tore them apart. We absolutely tore them apart. And when the penalty can't remember who was pulled down, it might have been Sadio, and Millie had just come on the pitch. And I said to my wife then, I said, if Millie puts this away, we win the league. That was the moment that for me, Mo's thing later was that was icing on the cake. Because it was 1-0, obviously you don't like a 1-0 lead. But I knew if we put that penalty away, that was it. And then Trent scores a classic goal, rip-roaring goal. But when Millie's penalty hit the back of the net, I hugged my wife. I said, we've won the league. That was the moment for me. Mo's, Ali seeing Mo and Mo, outrunning Daniel James and making De Gea look foolish and ripping his shirt off. We'd already won the league. That was the time when the fans felt, to your point, felt comfortable. And now you're going to believe us.
So yeah, once again, the short answer, Henderson lifting the trophy, because we weren't, obviously the supporters weren't there. We didn't really hear the whole story. Like, it seemed like some family was there. I'm guessing, you were there. What was that? It was kind of amazing on TV as an experience, but what was it like, that night?
I was there. Yeah. The family thing, my entire day was spent negotiating with the UK government and with DCMS and with Merseyside Police and with, we need a license to run a game. Right, so you need to have a certificate, a safety certificate. We had, we believed, got again, long answer, permission for the families to be at Anfield because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. But with criteria, then they changed their mind that morning, and then I spent all of that day. This was the Chelsea game at Anfield, negotiating with the British government to get them into Anfield, and it finally came through to get a safety certificate. At 4:30, I was emotionally exhausted by about 5 o'clock, and but went back home, got my suit on, and had one of those surreal moments when the final whistle went. There was one guy to my left and one guy to my right, and a bottle of champagne between us. And when the final whistle went, I poured a glass of champagne for Kenny Dalglish. I poured a glass of champagne for Ian Rush, and the three of us went like that. We were the only three people in the director's box. Absolutely.
It's magical. So we are running a little short on time. Can you stick with us a few more minutes? How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Got a bit of beer left. I'm good.
Good. Cheers to that, and cheers for those memories. So, a question and a little bit of a transition. Amy Kate, who I think you know, she's chair of the OLSC in Carlsbad, California. So first of all, she starts out, welcome back to California. Please tell us about your role at Wrexham AFC and how that came about.
Well, it's I don't even know where to start on. There's no short answer to this one. When my dad had a pub. When he left the docks, he got a pub on Scotty Road. We finally got a pub between Chester and Wrexham in a little village called Marford, which sits on the Chester Road. And that was in the mid 60s. And so my formative years, I'm born and bred in Liverpool, but then I think I was 10 and we moved to just outside of Wrexham. So Wrexham became kind of my second club. And in those days, Wrexham would draw 14,000, 15,000 people playing at their peak in the second division, beat Arsenal in the FA Cup. We're playing in the European Cup, Porto, Hajduk Split, Real Zaragoza. I mean, unbelievable. So I probably watched 200 Wrexham games and loved it and played for Wrexham schoolboys. So my life at that period was playing myself whenever I could get to see Liverpool, but then always knew I could go to the racecourse ground and watch Wrexham. So I don't know, fast forward 50 years and I get contacted by a mutual friend who said, I got a couple of guys who are looking to buy Wrexham Football Club. And of course, I had known who those couple of guys were based on the rumors. And they're very interested in talking to you because everybody said you need to talk to Peter Moore because he kind of grew up there, he played there, he's got deep roots there, and his family still lives outside of Wrexham. And my family is my two brothers and my sister and their families. And so, I take a phone call, I do a couple of Zooms, and then I get a call from Rob McElwain. He said, look, I live in Brentwood in Los Angeles. I had, happened to be here in Montecito where I live. And he said, I'm going to drive up and I'm going to talk, if you will give me 2 hours. I mean, fundamentally, they wanted me to stay in Britain and be the CEO of Wrexham, which just wasn't going to happen. But I did say, look, it's a great town. It's gone through tough times. The football club used to be immense. It's still they still get 5,000-6,000, even though just awful, although improving with a big win today against Woking Town. And he said, look, and I said, all right, I have a question for you, Rob. So Rob is Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and then great series, which is my world colliding, called Mythic Quest on Apple TV, which is brilliant and very scary because it's video game studio. And he plays the creative producer, and it's a brilliant comedy series. But I said, why? And I said, you've never been to Wrexham. You have no idea. You don't know football. He said, the first month of lockdown, I, like everybody else, was going through Netflix and what can we watch? And I stumbled across this documentary series called Sunderland Till I Die.
Brilliant.
And
Brilliant.
I start watching this, I'm in tears, for the first, and he said to me, I know these people. And I said, people in Sunderland? No, this is Philadelphia. This is South Philly. This is every community that lives and dies by its sports team. And the Eagles have done this to me, says Rob. And so I said, yeah, it's a brilliant documentary series. You don't even have to like football. He said, I didn't even watch the football bits. I loved it in the pub and the agony of what these people were going through. I said, yeah, Sunderland is a massive football club that should be, still knocking on the door of the Premier League, if not in the Premier League. And I said, it's only 6 years ago where they beat us with a beach ball incident, which I'll explain to you. But But based on seeing Sunderland Till I Die, he calls up Ryan Reynolds and says, we need to buy a football club. We need to give back to the community, because football seems to be the best platform to do that. And so I spent 2 hours with him. We went back I explained, what Wrexham was all about. And it's an unbelievable club with a great following, big stadium. If you redo it, it's an easy 20,000 seater stadium. And I work with them. I've been on with them today about a bunch of stuff, and they're both very engaged. It's a blast being part of the whole thing. I'm a unpaid volunteer advisor and chip in on all kinds of things. So I love it. And it's, again, giving back to a football club that gave me so much when I was a kid.
I love that. That's brilliant. I've heard a little bit of that story, but thank you. So I warned you earlier. I went to Tarporley County High School.
Oh my gosh.
Outside of Chester.
Yeah, I know where Tarporley is.
So is there a bigger rivalry in all of sports than Wrexham against Chester?
It's hatred. We would go to Chester, the old day, and because it's 9 miles apart, the two cities, both in the old days. I'm talking the old days, they're in the 3rd division or the 4th division. But Wrexham versus Chester was brutal. And of course, Rushy started at Chester, and he's a Chester lad, Harden, Flint lad. But Wrexham Chester was in the days on the terraces in the 70s, that unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, and I think it's cooled a little bit since then, but I'm hopeful those days get back again. And as you see with Rob and Ryan, they've already put in their manifesto, always beat Chester.
It's not happening. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. Hollywood, Philadelphia, no, Chester. Yeah. Yeah. So Chester's actually in 2nd place. So we're doing all right this year. So we've got to transition. If I can keep you a little bit longer, I want to go back to gaming. What are you doing with both Unity and also Nifty Games?
So with Nifty, a lot of people that I've worked with in the industry got together, kind of a dream team of mobile game developers that were managed to get both an NFL and NBA license for a unique game mechanic called Clash Royale, being the kind of card trading thing. And so a guy that I've known for many years, John Middleton, pinged me whilst I was in Liverpool and said, would you be willing, we're looking for board members, and your background with EA Sports, I was president of EA Sports and dealing with the leagues. And I looked at it and I thought, this is everything that I wish our games at EA had been. It's very accessible. So it's the classic, easy to get into and play, very hard to master because it's strategic. And so you get your NFL team, but it's a card-based game, albeit you animate an actual game. So I jumped in and I love it. It's huge potential. They both got an NFL and NBA license, but I'm an independent director on the board. I now have a full-time job, which is Senior Vice President and General Manager at Unity Technologies, running the sports and live entertainment group and building that group out. I can't go into a lot of detail because it's very much work in progress. Unity is a publicly traded company, 4,100 employees, 46 locations. Most of the mobile games, if you have a mobile game on your phone, it's on Unity. But one thing that the company's been able to do is to grow that game platform and that game engine into something that ties in fundamentally real-time 3D imagery. So we're working on what that means to sports, what that means to music concerts, huge progress in the last 12 months in automotive design, architecture, construction, anything in which you need to imagine something three-dimensionally. My simple objective is to fix VAR through 3D. And if I can go to my grave having fixed VAR, then I'll have achieved everything. We're making three-dimensional decisions using two-dimensional digital assets, and random people are drawing lines from a place outside of Heathrow Airport called Stockley Park. and I just think that we can do things so much better if we use three-dimensional volumetric data, which is what we're working on. So that's about as much as I can say. But I didn't actually envision that I would come back so quickly to full-time work, but I saw enough. And the CEO of Unity is my old CEO at EA, John Riccatello. And so I looked at some of the stuff, talked to some of those people. I said, I got to jump back in here and be a part of this.
I think it's great. You continue to combine your passions, which is what we all want to do in life and work and all those kind of things. I just have one more question. Obviously during the pandemic, the experience has changed of watching Liverpool. Up in Boston and Cambridge, we go to the Phoenix Landing. It's been our ancestral home since before LFC Boston even existed. What's your, do you have a local pub out there, or, what's your game day experience during the pandemic?
The challenge is, since I arrived, which is only in December, we've been on lockdown. So then we're on the West Coast. So, there's nothing worse than going through that Leicester game at 4 a.m. and it just ruins your entire weekend, right? So, and I'm used to that from the old days. There is a pub here that they're not on OLSC. I'm going to have to talk to Jane to see whether Jane and Sophie can grab me OLSC status here in Santa Barbara. But like any other town or city in America, there's a Liverpool fan base here. There's about 50 people, from what I understand, that gather at a local bar down on the waterfront here in Santa Barbara. I haven't been down there myself. We're just not allowed to gather. And some of the kickoff times are not really conducive, as typical on the West Coast of opening up during a pandemic. But once everything's back to normal, I'll show up and scare the life out of them and watch the game with them. My game watching experience right now is I'm back to what I used to be, which is if it's a game like Leicester, always put on whatever shirt we're playing in, and which I could never do, in the boardroom, obviously, or in the director's box. And depending on the kickoff time, it's either a cup of coffee or a beer. And then my wife, who I think arrived back, and we may embarrass her and drag her on, came along for this journey for 3 years and went to 100. We both went together to 160 Liverpool games. We never missed a game in 3 years, no matter where we were playing in the world. And she learned very quickly what football was all about, and great stories about chatting for half an hour with some nice guy called Alex about red wine. And, of course, it's Alex Ferguson. And her best mates to this day are Ian Rush and Kenny Dalglish, who ping her more than they ping me to chat with them, So, and just to finish on the great story, where to go back to where we started in the boardroom, and this nice man lives in Hale, Manchester. She's chatting with him for 20 minutes. And then I come over and I'm starstruck, and she goes, "Yeah, meet Kevin." And she said, "Kevin, I forgot to ask, what do you do?" And of course, it's Kevin Keegan, and he is wonderful with her. And but he's like, and I am like, very rarely do I'm like shaking, but first time I met Kevin. But she'd been chatting for 20 minutes. So some guy called Kevin, and didn't know what he did.
So the jealousy levels have just risen exponentially, 160 matches, like Kevin Keegan. You mentioned Elvis Costello earlier, the soundtrack of my life. So, this has been brilliant. I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm sure our viewers have enjoyed listening in. Thanks so much for your time and involvement today, Peter. On behalf of the committee, members of LFC Boston, we'll send you an invite. It'll be early, especially if it's against United or City at the the 7:30 matches. Come join us for a match when you're in Boston next time. And we'd love to do something with the foundation. I know your daughter's involved in that. Maybe we can, when it's safe to do so, we can do something together in the city. So just a couple of thoughts, and then I'll pass it over to Garrett. We're doing these talks every couple of weeks. It's one of the benefits of being a member, so people out there should be a member. And our next talk is with Kiva O'Neill. She's the staff writer covering Liverpool for The Athletic.
Yep.
Before joining The Athletic, she was, of course, senior football writer with Liverpool Echo. So please join us the weekend. We're still working on the date. It'll probably be February 27th because the Sheffield United match got moved. So with that, Peter, thanks again, and I'll hand over to Garrett.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Again, a big thanks to you, Peter Moore, for joining us today, and to all of you who have joined us today. A reminder that you can learn more about the North Liverpool Food Bank in the chat or on social media posts regarding today's event. On behalf of LFC Boston, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Thank you, and you'll never walk alone.
Thanks, everyone.